Welcome to Master of Science with host Professor James McCanney. The good professor's career spans 50 years as a university teacher, scientist, and engineer. Each week, he will explore the rapidly changing world of science as many long-held theories are crumbling under the weight of new data. He will cover the fields of geology, archaeology, meteorology, oceanography, space science, astronomy, cosmology, biological evolution, virology, energy, mathematics, and more. So please welcome the host of Master of Science, James McCanney.
Good evening, everybody. Episode number 61, Master of Science with Professor James McCanney. Here we are, and unfortunately, I have to spend this show talking about something very negative, and that is that NASA has shut down and the European Space Agency has shut down any release of information of any kind from the passage of Comet 3I Atlas. And so tonight, I'm going to give you a somewhat of a rendition of the history of NASA hiding data. I'm not talking about the Apollo moon program, which they completely destroyed all the data relative to that. But I'm going to be talking about the space science programs and their history of hiding data. It's informative. It's unfortunate, but this goes back to my observing this when I was at Cornell. In 1979, I accused them on campus because NASA had a huge presence at Cornell, still does, of space scientists, astronomers, astrophysicists who are resident and employed by NASA, but resident at Cornell. And then you have the Cornell Space Science Department, astronomy, etc., astrophysics faculty. And this is not just there. This is everywhere. And so, unfortunately, now a lot of people might say, well, the government's shut down. It just happened to shut down the same day as this comet went by Mars. And no. Let me tell you how it actually works. All the people in the federal government were reporting to work. All of the facilities were there, including NASA. The lights were on. The computers were on, all of the satellites. You think the satellites went on vacation because the government didn't have funding? No, they are up there operating, as normal. And the European Space Agency, which did not shut down, has full access to all of the NASA feeds. In fact, most of the satellites looking at this comet as it approached Mars were from the European Space Agency, and they've completely shut down, blacked out completely. Actual criminal behavior, obviously hiding data. So the way I'm going to do this tonight, I'm going to talk first about the history of deception, the atmosphere of deception at the space agencies. And then on my Patreon channel, I'm going to have a long discussion of what you would see if NASA had their equipment releasing the data as they should have been. As this comet went by Mars, I'm going to explain what you are missing. And this is the only place on the planet you're going to get this, boys and girls, because nobody else has a true understanding of how comets work. And so anyway, if this particular show tonight will be 1 hour or possibly a little bit less, talking about the deception, and then go to my Patreon channel, the patreon.com/JMCCSCI, for an additional, very extensive lecture of the effects of this comet passing Mars and what you would see, the visual effects. And by the way, regarding the Patreon channel, it's a paid, like $5 a month, a very minimal fee, or other people are donating $50 a month. That supports my work and the expenses of the various expenses that come along with the show. But it also shows your support that this is information you're not going to find anyplace else. And I don't give it away for free because also you have to understand the NASA scientists are coming to my page, my radio show, to get free information for their next publication. They've been doing this for years. So anyway, number of reasons for having the content of the scientific aspect of this behind a paywall and very minimal for you, the public. But so that's again at the Patreon channel. Okay, so let's go through the history of NASA faking and hiding data. When I was at Cornell, 1979 to 81, 2 years, I was in the physics and math departments there, faculty member. I had access, 100% access to data that was coming back from the Voyager, the Pioneer spacecraft. They had spacecraft at the planet Venus, orbiting Venus, and many probes around the solar system. I had access to that data. And the meetings many times, in fact, just about every day in the Space Science building, they had a big auditorium there with a great big screen where the data would come in, and I would see that data right along with the NASA scientists, with the other people that were seeing this. And what I realized is these clowns didn't have a clue what was going on. They would make all kinds of stories up, hip pocket explanations. That's what I called them. Something would appear and I go, oh, well, that's due to this. And then pretty soon there'd be a publication, and that would be the story that would stick. It wasn't science. It was people throwing mud on the wall and hoping it would stick. And since nobody refereed their articles that went into Science or Nature magazine relative to the Voyager spacecraft, etc., nobody refereed them, really. They rubber stamped them. They were supposedly refereed, but really not, because supposedly NASA scientists were the experts. And so from those early beginnings, I saw the corruption of data, the hiding of data, things that didn't make sense got swept under the rug. And I got fed up with it because there was just corruption of data, pure and simple, to keep their the money flowing from the federal government, let's put it that way, and to guard the Holy Grail. At that time, Carl Sagan was the David Duncan Chair of Astronomy. He was off in Hollywood making the Cosmos series, which solidified the theories, what I call the axioms of astronomy. And I'll just list them here so you have an idea. And these are still in place today. That comets are dirty snowballs. That's one of the axioms of astronomy, that the Big Bang, the universe began in a Big Bang. Another one was that the cosmos was gravitationally controlled and there were no electromagnetic effects possible in outer space. And then the last one was that the solar system formed all at one time 4.5 billion years ago, and that these things are like nursery rhymes. You still get this in any of the articles, the gee whiz articles that come out of NASA. But here's what happened. Let me explain what happened. I started taking the data and publishing it originally in the physics department, and then they outlawed me. Talk about censorship. They outlawed me from publishing using Cornell's name. And so I walked across campus, and I really from the beginning I was resident in the mathematics department. So I started publishing in the mathematics department with Cornell University Department of Mathematics, and successfully published in peer-reviewed astrophysics journals. Okay, so you can see those papers dealing with galactic evolution, Saturn's sweeper moons predicted. And so anyway, the point is that I had access to data, unlimited access to data. I could go up and look at it. I had access to all of the data, the instrumentation, the explanation of the instruments that were designed by various people to go on this Voyager spacecraft, etc. Okay. And had access to the meetings where I realized that my theoretical work, which I had already developed before I got to Cornell, dealing with electromagnetism in celestial mechanics, all of that I had developed. So I started seeing this. I started publishing my papers. And then NASA realized, wait a minute, what's this guy doing? He's taking our data and he's proving our axiomatic structure incorrect. And so then they started hiding the data. The NASA came up with rules, and the principal investigator said, hey, this guy's taking the data from the space probes and publishing other results, proving his own theoretical results. So they limited access to the data. This is the beginning of the end of NASA as an open agency. And remember, this is like 1979 to 81 time frame. And by the way, this is what I think is humorous too, this is before a lot of the professors that are around today at Johns Hopkins or one of the other Cornell or Princeton or Harvard or the West Coast schools, before they were even born. The people who now are doing the same thing and believing that comets are dirty snowballs, etc., and passing this down through the news media, the corrupt science news media. And by the way, when 3I Atlas, about 3 days before it reached Mars, all of a sudden, all of the NASA mouthpiece news agencies went dark. They didn't publish anything about 3I Atlas. It is like it fell off the edge of the earth. It became a non-topic instantly, and through the whole close encounter, you would have thought this would be the biggest story that ever hit the press. This, I'll tell you, 3I Atlas is the most watched, most studied, most instrumentation looking at it comet in the history of astronomy. Everything was pointed. They did not have the James Webb Telescope before. That was pointed at it. You have the Hubble Space Telescope, which, by the way, NASA lied. They took thousands of photographs of Hale-Bopp and claimed they never took a single photograph. Well, of course they took millions of literally video of Hale-Bopp with the Hubble Space Telescope. I mean, the lying that is going on is just unbelievable. I want to mention, I'll be mentioning a few names here, and they deserve honorable mention. One is a guy named Tony Phillips. Now, he's worked, what you have to understand, too, is there was a transition in NASA around 1991, and this is when Robert Harrington returned with information. Actually, this was going on before. But NASA developed news release agencies, and they clamped down on scientists, made them sign non-disclosure agreements, basically gag orders that they would not release any information outside of the confines of the news release agencies of NASA. So a guy named Tony Phillips steps in, and everything had to flow through him. So you would see back in the old days, Tony Phillips, Tony Phillips, Tony Phillips. And he's still at work. He's still out there filtering, homogenizing, blending, and pasteurizing NASA data before it ever gets to you, the public. So Tony deserves an honorable mention. And by the way, here's an example of the kind of thing he did. When I was at American Geophysical Union meetings, I would have, say, a poster session or whatever information I was presenting at the American Geophysical Union meeting. And by the way, if you don't know what they are, it's about twice. There's the major meeting, and then there's a secondary meeting. They're about 6 months apart. And I would have a poster, something like the one behind me right here, as informative, and you would be in an auditorium. And then they had a press room where you would leave your information, and it might be a published paper from NASA scientists, it might be something, whatever people thought would grab interest in the press room, and your hope would be that the press would pick up on it and publish an article on you and your work. And so this was an example. This one behind me was a typical type of poster, not this one in particular, but this is the kind of thing I would have there. And these were 4 by 8 foot sheets of printed paper, which, by the way, I printed myself, designed myself, produced myself. And as you know, if you followed me, I don't take government money. I never did. I've never signed government contracts. And Tony Tony Phillips would take my information from the press room and throw it in the garbage. Yeah, that's the kind of thing that Tony would do to make sure that nobody got information about the real situation with comets. Okay, that's an example. And the egos, let me talk about egos in science. Very high level of egos, and everything is like one of those not invented here type of things. If it wasn't invented at NASA, then it can't exist. Let me go back to the principal investigator thing, and I'll give a few examples. As time went on, first of all, NASA said, okay, the principal investigators, these are the guys who were chosen by NASA to be the principal investigators on, say, the Voyager spacecraft, a certain instrument, or something like that. And physicists who had earned their stripes, their PhDs, they got a position at NASA. And so anyway, they got to have the data for, first of all, 30 days. And then when 30 days would come up and you'd say, well, okay, give me the data, they go, oh, well, we've extended it to 2 months. And then after 2 months would go by, you'd say, okay, give me the data. Then, oh, well, we've extended to 6 months, then a year, and then never. And so the other thing is, then they said, well, only principal investigators can have access to data and publish results of the data, which meant that they got to schmooze the data, do whatever they want with it, and nobody ever got to see the original data sets. Totally corrupt science. That meant that the principal investigators had complete access to data and nobody else did. So what happened when I was at Cornell, there were quite a few independent scientists. They did not work for NASA. They were well educated. I'm not going to name names here, but very good scientists, and they all went the way of the dinosaur. And and with me, anyway, if you followed my work, you know that story. I'm not going to repeat it here. But at any rate, what NASA did then is they clamped down on any information, and scientists could no longer walk up to a microphone and talk about anything. And it seemed like every time they did, something would go amiss. I'll give you a little story here, a couple of them. I had a web page this back in the 1990s. The SOHO web satellites, the SOHO satellites that constantly monitor the sun, were online. And one day, I was watching the live feed, and in came this tremendous blast of protons. And they weren't just any protons, they were cosmic ray protons. And it came with the light. In other words, the light pulse from the sun, the protons came like maybe a second afterwards. So they were traveling literally at the speed of light. So you could see the visual eruption on the sun, 8 minutes or whatever it is, to get from the sun to Earth to the SOHO satellite. And then the protons, and the way the protons show up as white streaks. Now, the right behind me here is an example of the SOHO camera, a photograph from the SOHO camera. So take this blue background and just imagine white streaks going whoosh, whoosh in all directions. Those are the cosmic ray protons, but they're coming from the sun. And nobody had ever imagined that the sun could produce cosmic rays. And typically they would come from a nova star from a far distant, in the galaxy someplace. And they would come in at the speed of light, literally, the protons. And so what I discovered was protons, cosmic rays coming from the sun, which was never heard of before. So I write it up, I send it into the NASA, the Goddard, the people I knew there at the time, and I get this letter back, a very nasty one, saying that only principal investigators can make discoveries. So now they have, even though the NASA scientists completely missed it, they had no idea what was going on. The people paid to study SOHO satellite images and to interpret them and to publish the results for which only they could publish, completely missed the fact that the sun was pumping out cosmic rays. I discovered it and published it. And then they said only NASA scientists. So the NASA scientists got credit. They wouldn't have even known it if it weren't for me. This is the level of corruption inside NASA. Let me give you another example. I was at an American Geophysical Union meeting, and there was a closed NASA meeting, and this is back in the 1980s. So I was going up. I was going to stand outside because they wouldn't let me into the meeting, a news release meeting, and I believe it was relative to one of the comet activities, experimental activities at the time. So I get in the elevator, I'm going up, and the meeting is just about to start, and there was just another gentleman and myself. And so I see his name tag, and then he was associated with one of the, I think it was one of the big New York newspapers. And his name was Tom. I remember his first name. I don't remember his last name. But anyway, he was going up to the press conference, and since I couldn't get in, I told him, I said, why don't you ask a question if they've considered any other comet models to explain the data, specifically the McCanny plasma discharge comet model. So he went in and he asked the question, and I never saw him again, ever again. I suspect he got thrown out of there and was banished from anything NASA. That's the level they will go to hide and protect their information. Okay, let's go on to some other things. Back in let's go back to Robert Harrington. The year is 1986. Actually before then, but his assistant, Tom Van Flandern, who was working at the Naval Observatory as an assistant to Robert Harrington, who is the head of the Naval Observatory, astronomer, and Harrington had worked on searching for the planets earlier in, let's say Tomlinson, who had discovered the Pluto, for example. Harrington was still looking for the object that they called Planet X. Literally, this is going back to the 1930s and actually back to the Herschels in the 1700s, because they knew that Neptune and Uranus were, at that time, only Neptune had been discovered, and so anyway, was being pulled down in its orbit. So they kept looking for this other object, which they called Planet X, literally, because Planet X is an astronomical term. It's got a new modern twist to it that makes it sound like craziness. But Planet X, literally back in those days, was a designation for a planet that had not been discovered yet, or one that had been recently discovered that did not have an official astronomical designation from the it's an international board of astronomers that choose names, typically from mythology, for astronomical objects that have been discovered. Okay, so Tom Van Flandern is pushing Harrington and saying there's this Planet X object out there that we know is pulling down on Neptune and Uranus. And Tomlinson had, I believe that was his name, he discovered Pluto. At first they thought that would be the Planet X, but soon afterwards it was literally Robert Harrington who discovered Charon, the moon of Pluto, and was famous for that discovery. But with a moon, something orbiting Pluto, they could calculate the mass of Pluto and then realized it was far too small and really not in the right position to be pulling down on Uranus and Neptune. So that revived the search for Planet X. Okay, so Harrington goes, they make some calculations. And by the way, this is the famous meeting, 1986, with Zecharia Sitchin he's studying ancient Sumerian tablets, etc., which is referring to this Nibiru thing. And so he goes to Harrington at the Naval Observatory, and they have a famous meeting. And it's actually filmed. I have a copy of it. It's not on my current webpage. And there's some controversy over copyright issues with that film, but I've seen it. And they're discussing, and Harrington draws out an orbit that they think, as at the time, is the orbit, that's their estimated orbit of this planet Nibiru, or Planet X. They're mixing the names, but Planet X was what Harrington called it. Okay, so anyway, Harrington draws out a 3,500-year orbit. So that's where this 3,500-year Nibiru thing comes from, and it turned out to be totally false. It was an incorrect orbit. The true orbit of what Harrington eventually discovered was 4,250 years. But that never got back to Sitchin or the people who went crazy. In the 1990s then, finally by 1991, Harrington had been to New Zealand a number of times in the spring observing season, looking for Planet X. Down in the lower part of the solar system, you can only see it from the southern hemisphere in the months of May and June. And he discovers Planet X, literally, and under NASA contract. This is the funny part, is that NASA later denied this, and it turned out, as I discovered, it was one of my discoveries, published it in my book. You can find the entire history of this in my book, The Real History of Planet X, Update 2020. It's on my webpage. Literally what happened is that the CIA started, that's when they went in, like I say, 1991, the CIA went in and shut down NASA. I saw it happening. And a lot of people left NASA, a lot of the older people, and Goddard and Los Alamos and JPL, and the ones who stayed had to sign non-disclosure agreements, gag orders, and they were moved off principally to Tier 2 science. And so there was a group of Tier 1 scientists who maintained observation of this object, and as they quickly discovered, it had some moons, at least one big one, and they were able to determine the mass was about 4 Earth masses. That's the result that Harrington actually published before he came to an untimely demise from rapid onset cancer, the same thing that killed other people in this Planet X milieu that followed, including a guy named Chuck Schrammick, a news reporter from Houston, Texas, who was one of the people who reported seeing the companion when Hale-Bopp was first discovered. Okay, so that's another story. I'm not going to go into that. But NASA was part and parcel in creating a complete cover story. And this was Hale-Bopp, literally a new planet being formed from a comet, was in the solar system for 6 years. And this controversy raged with this lady who came out of the CIA. She was the wife of one of the Skywatch CIA members, or what you might say, head of that agency. And she was on the radio show. She was highly promoted, saying that on May 15, 2003, Planet X would crash into Earth and everybody was going to die. And it turned out it was a full moon, a very rare orange full moon, very close to Earth full moon, and it would have come up. Anyway, that whole disinformation campaign was operated behind the scenes by NASA. They provided photographs and images and starfield photographs during that whole campaign, just to give you an idea that they are part and parcel to putting out misinformation campaigns. And why am I talking about this? Because they're doing the same thing today with Comet 3I Atlas. All of this, hundreds and hundreds of YouTube channels, web pages, new news agencies claiming that it's a alien spacecraft, and you have a Harvard or Princeton professor claiming it's a spacecraft. All misinformation, promoted and sponsored. And this is the dialogue. See, this is whenever they create a misinformation campaign, they create both sides of the dialogue. And it's the crazies, and then NASA comes riding in. NASA let this go, this craziness about 3I Atlas, For months, literally months, they let this rampant misinformation, and just it's a spacecraft, and then it's got people seeing windows in it, and there's alien spacecraft going to come out and it's changing its orbit and it's going to crash into Earth. All of this misinformation was by design. And notice NASA didn't step in until just a few days ago, and they come in and go, oh, no, it's just a comet, normal comet, coming in from a deep space. And but by then, all the damage had been done. And so you have all these radio shows repeating this nonsense. You have people who have no idea what they're talking about, repeating it and going off on a tangent and making conclusions that are totally false. So this has been another example of NASA not only hiding data, but creating misinformation stories, supporting it, and completing this dialogue, a supposedly controversy, so that you, the public, never see the real story. And the real story is Comet 3I Atlas is a very special comet. And it's so one thing I'm going to do is when I finish this program, I'm going to do a special on the Patreon channel talking about all of the science, that what you would see if NASA had not gone into a complete blackout mode on this. And there's a tremendous number of visuals that you would see or would be captured, and then also things like electromagnetic effects that you cannot visibly see. Now, here's a question that was sent in by a listener, and he said, well, with this comet, it's visible to amateur telescopes. Why are we not seeing tons of amateur telescope photography? So let me actually read the listener's comment because I think it's very well worded in his query. It says, normally the most trivial astronomical event is thoroughly documented by amateur astronomers, but nothing. I have decent imaging equipment, but not visible from my location. Normally a flood of images can be found. Now, I think that's pretty accurate. But let me, here's my answer. Here's my answer that I wrote, posted on the blog. This type of amateur blackout, this is me talking, responding to this listener. I say, this type of amateur blackout has happened numerous times before. It shows the ability of controllers to completely shadow ban a topic. As mundane as it may seem, the true nature of comets is central to the secret society's sacred knowledge, and it is a control issue also. I have talked about this extensively since historically it is the large comet that ravages Earth, not the NASA and asteroid hit it BS. I am going to make this a topic on my show, as the no news issue is bigger than the simple comet story. NASA, the front agency for science in the USA, has been blocking my work generated when I was a faculty member at Cornell University, 1979 to 81. And once I was on the Art Bell show, and Art asked me why my work, which he stated was clearly correct, was being blocked. I will discuss all of this and the history of this on my TV show tomorrow night. Thanks for the comment. Possibly a false flag alien invasion. And then I refer to the Art Bell Heaven's Gate thing, which was an entire crazy, I talk about this in my book, The Real History of Planet X, Update 2020. But it's a very complicated story because after decades of research and understanding and being literally in the middle of this entire Hale-Bopp controversy, I realized what was going on, that Hale-Bopp was literally Planet X. And that's what Harrington discovered. And the whole misinformation campaign about the moon, this full moon on May 15, 2003, being Planet X. And at the same time, up in the sky, everybody could see literally Planet X. And they were able to hide that from the public. They were able to hide that from the public. And the other twist to that story is when it was first discovered by Harrington in 1989, literally, and then he confirmed the orbit by 1991 with return trips to New Zealand. By the time 1991 rolled around, they realized that this object, which was 4 Earth mass, was literally on a direct collision course, literally with planet Earth, within 4 lunar distances. So this was meant to be a earth-shattering disaster. So they went into lockdown mode so that nobody at NASA really knew about it. And Harrington was killed, I'm convinced of that. All of a sudden he develops rapid onset cancer. He's out of there. Tom Van Flandern, who's his assistant, who prompted him to do the Planet X study and got the funding from NASA to do it, all of a sudden goes dark. And he says, oh, there's no such thing as Planet X. Tom Van Flandern then becomes a handler for a group that was actually created by the CIA, the Nutcase Group, and they don't create these people. They usually find willing idiots, I will call them that, out in the general public who are already developing, and they come in and they fund them and they back them. But Tom Van Flandern was a handler for this group, is still working at the Naval Observatory, but being very highly controlled by the CIA. And Van Flandern had a web page. This is what's hysterical, almost. Not funny, but it's funny in an odd sense. That Tom Van Flandern had a web page that stated that a planet between Mars and Jupiter was destroyed by Planet X in a collision, and that's where the asteroid belt came from. All of this junk, space junk, rocks, etc., was the result of a planet being hit by another planet between Mars and Jupiter. That was Tom Van Flandern's theory, yet he stated that there could be no such thing as Planet X, because the solar system, according to axioms of astronomy, formed 4.5 billion years ago, and nothing happened since. This is the Carl Sagan story that they had to, by the way, push because Sagan was trying to get rid of this Velikovsky guy who was claiming that the big comet Venus ravaged Mars, which is literally the case in the scientific sense. That's I've proven that scientifically, and how Venus, the tail drag, formed allowed Venus to drop down into the orbit we see today. And of course, it had 2 occasions when it ravaged Earth. And now you have these clowns running around the internet saying, oh, everything was back at the Younger Dryas 12,000 years ago. No, we know that big events, and of course they're claiming it was because an asteroid hit it, right out of NASA, pure disinformation, on the Joe Rogan show, etc. And, completely sidetracking the truth that within the last 5,000 years, Earth has had 2 major cometary encounters with big comets. One was the Noah's Flood, where we spent 40 days and 40 nights approximately in the tail of a large comet. The other one was the Venus event, which all of the ancient cultures talk about. The Kolbrin, my book, The Atlantis to Tesla, the Kolbrin Connection, introduced in 2002 the Kolbrin into the United States. That was immediately sidetracked by the CIA, made into a crazy topic about, the Mayan calendar in 2012, the end of the Mayan calendar in the Earth. Just craziness. And these are all crazy stories developed as basically a counter story to, and then of course the NASA white hats write in and save the day and say, no, that couldn't be true. And so that's what they do, and they're doing it again. That's why I'm bringing all this up. They're doing it again with 3I Atlas. They're making it into a crazy story. You got Avi Loeb from Harvard saying it's an alien spaceship, and he's getting blanket press. You could not be any place. You would have to live in a cabin in the middle of the woods and hunt deer for your food and have no internet connection and no contact with the outside world. Unless you're that person, you have heard about Avi Loeb saying this comet is a spaceship. And then NASA lets this run for 2 months without saying a word, and then comes in at the last minute, says, "Oh no, that's not true." This is the dog and pony show all over again. The Hale-Bopp, Planet X, Mayan calendar, end of the Millennium Bug. That was another misinformation program to make everybody shut off their computers and think the world was going to end. This goes on and on. In 3I Atlas, this comet is another one. It's a normal comet, but they're using this opportunity. And what I've said, and I believe in the background, they're building up to a false flag alien invasion. I mean, if it doesn't have the writing on the wall here, I don't know what does. And other people are saying this too for other reasons, because a lot of people are biting the bait, hook, line, and sinker. Oh, this is an alien spacecraft, they're saying. And no. So at any rate, this listener is right on. Where's all the amateur photographs and data that are on these private web pages? Not even NASA web pages. They're non-existent. They're not there. And like he said, even the most mundane astronomical event has amateur stuff all over the place. Photographs, and then you have the standard news outlets, the spaceweather.com, space.com, the laundry list of other standard NASA outlets, quiet as a church mouse on this topic as this comet approaches Mars. Then a complete shutdown of NASA, all NASA web pages completely shut down. But, and it's not due to the government shutdown. All those people they have to report to work. All the federal employees are not free. It's just they're not getting paid. The lights are on. The computers are running. There's no reason for the servers to be shut down. And even if they were, the European Space Agency has duplicate of everything of NASA. And the majority of all of the satellites and imagery and equipment looking at this comet 3I Atlas as it's passing Mars belong to the European Space Agency, and they're not shut down. Everything is a complete blackout. So, like I say, go to my Patreon channel. I'll have a complete rundown of what you would see if they had the cameras turned on in all the other equipment at NASA. So I've got a few other points to make here. NASA, if NASA or the European Space Agency releases anything now, it will, let me just say, it has no value at all. There will be no value in any type of data or photograph releases from NASA, because they've had plenty of time to doctor it, Photoshop it, remove, blend it, homogenize it, and fake it. Or just out and out create false images, taking from old stock from NASA, Mars orbiters, or whatever. So they have plenty of time to create fake data, literally, and they will do it. NASA is the most untrustworthy agency ever to crawl out from under a federal rock. Deception, never a straight answer, is NASA. I'm going to name a couple other names here: Michael Muma and Kerry Liss. That's Lisse. They have been repeatedly hiding data. One of their most famous ones is when they accidentally, it was actually discovered by the European Space Agency, but Liss took credit for it, discovering X-rays on the sunward side of comets. And it's something that I predicted in my original papers, published papers in 1979. I said, due to this good diagram here, due to the electron beam coming in from the sunward side, when that interacts with the negative comet nucleus, it's going to break those electrons and create X-rays, or it can also interact with the atmosphere or coma around the nucleus of a comet and create ultraviolet, and I say all the way up to X-rays. In the paper predicting this in 1979, they are discovered by accident in 1996, And what was it, the Rosat satellite, they accidentally pointed it to a comet, and then they pointed to Hale-Bopp, which was up in the sky. Hyakutake was the first one. And those people, Muma and Liss and their band of merry men, Tom Craven, who is a chemist, actually well-intentioned. I wouldn't put Tom Craven in the conspiratorial category, but Muma and Liss very much doctoring the data and pushing this idea that it's due to charge exchange. And 10 years later, they gave me no credit, no mention of my name at all for predicting this. Literally 10 years later, the European Space Agency scientists pick up the same data and they go, definitely, this is not due to charge exchange. It is due to bremsstrahlung X-rays. And that's exactly what I predicted. And so they were able, for a 10 or 15-year period, to ride this wave they created because they were principal investigators. I was the first person to show that Mars had oceans because of the cratering. And there again, Muma picks this up and publishes it as it's his own work, and then makes the claim that this is billions of years ago, right away out of the NASA playbook that the solar system formed 4.5 billion years ago and never changed since. So you see how they hide things, they protect their turf because of their positions. And it's just corruption in science at its highest. I can go through other stories, but I'm not going to bore you with all of the interactions with these people over the decades. But they deserve honorable mention as corrupt scientists. I want to mention here also the control of this concept of comets and misinformation, because it is a control point. Now, I've been on international radio shows. I've been on Russian TV, primetime TV. I've been on Japanese primetime TV, talking about my work. I'm known internationally in the scientific community and outside of it. I've been a guest on Coast to Coast AM and probably every other major radio show and a lot of television shows. I've been on a History Channel special. So I'm well known in the public domain and in the private scientific domain. I was elected, if you want to call it that, or chosen to be the Scientist of the Year in Marquis Who's Who last year. My name appears in the Top Scientist book as the first person listed, and you can look in the Who's Who, so I'm listed as one of the top scientists, as Marquis Who's Who Scientist of the Year. So I'm well known both in the public world and in the private scientific world. But the point I'm making is that I was on Art Bell show. This is back in probably, I don't know the year, but anyway, Art and I would do a Christmas special every year. And it was with this one particular year I was talking about the Russian space program because I had been involved with Russian scientists at the University of Novosibirsk, and I learned a lot about the Russian space program. One of the things of which that the Russians had gone to the moon in the 1960s. They were going to orbit the moon and come back, and the cosmonauts had died because of X-ray exposure in the Van Allen belts. Okay, so anyway, that's another story. Not going to go there tonight. But anyway, we're on the air, Art Bell and myself, we're talking. And by the way, he would call me up before a show and he'd say, Jim, what are we going to talk about tonight? And he'd call me Jim. I like to be called James, but whatever. He could call me whatever he wants. But we talk about what we were going to talk about on the show, especially a big show like a Christmas special. And so anyway, we get into the middle of the show on air, and Art says, James, how come NASA and the scientific community will not acknowledge your plasma discharge comet model is clearly correct? The dirty snowball comet model is clearly incorrect. And how do you explain that? And I said, well, I think it's because of egos, and all the textbooks would have to be written, and all the all the shame that might go along with all of the published papers that NASA has published and scientists have published stating that comets are dirty snowballs and it's totally incorrect. And he goes, no, they could fix all that, or they could push you out of the way, they could steal it. Something else is going on. And Art was probably one of the more perceptive peoples that I've ever met in my life, along with other people. A lot of these talk show hosts are very perceptive. But Art was very perceptive. And anyway, so I thought about it, and I thought, there's something else deeper going on here. And as it turns out, he was right. He was right. And what I learned over the years and decades is that the secret societies, this is one of their hot buttons that they don't want you, the public, to know about. And here we come back to 3i Atlas. Why are they hiding the data? Because what that thing was doing to Mars was like electrical discharges, weather, hurricanes, potentially Mars turning into a comet itself as it formed with the comet 3i Atlas. In fact, all of those effects, like I say, I'll be talking about on my Patreon channel, to go there to listen to that. But anyway, Art says something else is going on. And so what I realized is that, yes, this is one of their main things. And then the reason started to solidify. It's a control issue. Because when you go to the evening news, what do they have? Oh, the stock market, the war in Iran, the war in the Mideast, and the Ukrainian war, and the taxation, and the this and then that, and all this fear and all these things that you got to keep, and it keeps you totally distracted from really what's going on. But the one thing that the controllers know that they don't have any control over, and that you would find out in a New York second if a big comet came near Earth, people just have an instinct, like deer in the headlights, or deer of fear of man. It's like instinctive in man to be afraid of comets. And there's reason. And so the space agencies and NASA do everything they can do to, there's just a little snowball, little icy wanderer, couldn't hurt a flea. They're little teeny things. Don't ever think they're big. They couldn't be big. All bullshit. Why? Because and we had a planet forming for 6 years up in the sky. You could see Hale-Bopp in the daylight sky. And nobody associated it with a forming planet. Why? Because they are so good at covering information. Now, what do you think would happen if 3i Atlas comes by Mars, a planet just a lot like Earth, and did a number on it? Electrical discharges, all kinds of disaster going on. Maybe, anyway, like I say, I'll talk about all of this on the other Patreon channel. But what do you think the population would do? They go, hey, that ain't no snowball, buddy. That ain't no, snowballs don't do stuff like that. And all of a sudden, people would go, wait a minute. They've been lying to us. That's where these big Earth-wide disasters come from, these passing comets. Not some little asteroid hitting Earth, or not some piece of space rock hitting Earth. That's not the big disaster. The big disaster come from these comet things. Yeah, that's what it's all about. It's keeping that story from you to the public. Now, take another story, the flat Earth. Where did the flat Earth thing come from? Well, it came from the Middle Ages and was taught from the pulpit. The common person would go to church. The guy would be up there and he says, at the end of the earth, you go out on the ocean, it's going to be fire-breathing dragons, everything terrible, wind, it's going to be a big waterfall and all the water is falling. If you sail a ship out there, you're just going to go off the edge of the earth and fall into abyss and never come back. So don't even think about it. It's a mental trap. And so they've been pulling this crap off for centuries, boys and girls. Yeah, and so the dirty snowball comet model is the flat Earth of the 20th century, 21st century. And it's to keep you under control, because if you ever realized that, hey, this is something that, and this is the point. If one of these babies ever shows up in the sky, and it could happen, who knows? They could come in like this guy came in on July 2nd, it was discovered. But it's going close to Mars, not Earth. It's not going to come close to Earth. In fact, it's not coming that close to Mars. But the point is that if something like this shows up one day, and of course they would know long in advance before it was ever publicly announced. But they wanted in place to go, oh, that's just a little snowball, 2 miles across, with all the NASA experts jumping up and down, going to study it for posterity so they understand how the solar system works. Bullshit. They are all a pack of liars. Anybody working at NASA, they signed a contract and they have to be a liar, a professional liar. That's what they are, PhD. And do you think they're going to go out and say something? No. They want their paycheck. They work through grad school, postdoc, getting a job, family starving to death. Finally, they get to buy a house and they got a job. Do you think those scientists are going to go against the grain and upset the apple cart? No. Absolutely no. And that's what this is all about, boys and girls. Deception for a paycheck from scientists. Now, where else have you seen that? Okay, I want to talk briefly about the Rosetta mission, another comet. This is a long time ago, but anyway, there was a comet 67P. The European Space Agency built a spacecraft, and they had a lander that was designed to land on the nucleus of a comet, a tremendously successful space mission where the orbiter would orbit and take photographs, and then the lander would land on the comet nucleus and then sample it. And of course, they expected to see snow and ice and vapor coming off the nucleus. So they get to the nucleus, and the closest they detected water to the nucleus was about 10 kilometers away, even though there was a huge water tail to the comet. And so the head of, at that time, a guy who worked for the European Space Agency, but was the head of NASA science in the United States, one of the longest term people in that position at NASA, got up and basically stated publicly, I saw a video of this one at the Paris Air Show, where they had a panel dealing with the Philae lander and the Rosetta mission, and this guy said in public and posted it in writing that comets are not dirty snowballs. Yet NASA keeps pushing this idea. The news media, etc., keeps pushing this dirty snowball concept. And clearly, what I've done, originally, decades and decades ago, half a century ago, almost, is correct. And they won't let that in the public eye. They just keep blocking it. And that's, again, what 3i Atlas is all about. They're going dark because everything I predicted would be visible in the data. Okay, so that's one thing. Let me go through my list. Oh yeah, they throughout the time, and especially today, they create. Now these are the intel agencies. They create web pages. They take people. I call them street people. People who need an ego boost. Typically, who think they're scientists but have no scientific background at all. They boost them up, they prop them up, they have conferences, they do all this stuff, they make a lot of money, and it's all under the table. But what they're doing is they're creating the crazy side of the scientific world. And so these people will take my work, turn it into a crazy topic, distort it out in all directions, and then that's what is promoted. That's what you get to see if you go on the internet. Anything that's real, they'll shadow ban. But anyway, the point is that they create, once again, I'll say it again, it's important to understand when you go and you see a web page with 500,000 subscribers, or these web pages are created. They get promoted on Joe Rogan radio show or whatever. These people are pushed there to create the opposite side, and then that allows NASA and what I call the white hats to come riding in, save the day with their correct theories. And the standard theory is always correct, or you have people like Neil deGrasse Tyson. His job is to make all those standard theories just sound like the best thing, and you can't question them because they're authoritative. They have all the data, and you don't. How could you question NASA? Then NASA is pure and good. And no, it's all a crock. It's all fabricated news, and that's the garbage science they pawn off to you, the public. So once again, they create the opposition. It's created opposition. They bolster them, and then that's usually provides a very easy target for the NASA people, who is like falling off a log. They don't have any competition. Just to be clear, most people may not know this, but one time I was called up, George Norrie called me up and he says, "Hey, we want a debate." This is on the Coast to Coast AM radio show. And we want you to debate Dr. David Morrison, who's the head of the Near-Earth Asteroid Reconnaissance Program at NASA, the NEAR program. And he's Carl Sagan's favorite student. So David Morrison would defend standard science, and I would defend my work, the electrical nature of the universe and solar system and the plasma discharge comet model, etc. And at the end of this, or during the debate, there was a call-in vote as to who was winning the debate. And I won this debate on the air, yes. And I thought I'd lose 100-0. I mean, when I started this, I thought, there's no way I'm going to win a debate against Carl Sagan's pet student, Dr. David Morrison, on air, and I ended up winning the debate. And so what that shows me, is that NASA does not have credibility, and that I do. So that's one. But I want to give you another Coast to Coast AM story. This is July 5th, 2005. I was invited to be again on the Coast to Coast AM show, and this was for the release of data from the Deep Impact probe that NASA had sent to a comet. And the idea was that you had, once again, two spacecraft, the impactor, which would go slam into the nucleus of a comet, and then the observing satellite, which would sit back there and watch this as the probe went down and smashed at high speed into the nucleus of a comet. And of course, what they thought, it would send out all of this ice and water. But it didn't. All it came out was rock and sand, not a trace of water. And NASA, if you go read about it, they fudged the data. And what they did is they said they saw water production in the tail area, and they attributed that to the impactor. But when you look at the actual data from the remote viewing satellite of the impactor, not a drop of water came out. Not a molecule of water came out. But you see how NASA fakes the data to make it look like their little pet theory is correct. And there was so little water, it said it would not account for any amount of water in the tail. But anyway, there was literally no water came out, observed from the observing spacecraft. And so they said, oh, well, now we got to build another one, and we got to send it deeper. The water and ice must be deeper. But the result was, when you look at the photographs of the nucleus, there was no water, ice, or snow. There was nothing. There was no water coming off the nucleus, contrary to the artist's conceptions of the snowball comet model, with all this vapor gushing out of the nucleus to form the tail. That's not reality. That's an artist's conception that they still will put out there in place of reality, of real data. But I just wanted to mention that because that night I went on the air, we are on the air, and NASA promised to release that data. NASA did not release it. They went dark, and that data did not appear for 6 months. Came out of the University of Arizona, one of the, in my opinion, the more corrupt astronomy departments on the planet. And they held the data. So they promised data on the 5th of July, 2005. We were waiting on air for the data. We talked about it, and what I talked about, what it would be expected. the electrical discharge, then dust coming out, no water. And NASA, that's actually what happened, but NASA did not release the data for another 6 months. Another 6 months, they held the data, and then we don't know what all they did with the data either. So anyway, once again, NASA hiding data. That's what they do. NASA is a corrupt agency. They should not be in existence. But I'll tell you something, they're Congress-proof. This is something that's a term we coined because NASA very wisely they distributed their work in all the different congressional districts. So if any congressman ever voted against a NASA proposal, they would target that region and say, this guy killed the NASA program there, and that guy would not get elected to Congress again. It would be political suicide to vote against a NASA project. And so we call it Congress-proof. Yeah, that's what it is. Okay, so let me look and see in my notes here. Any other topics? No, that's it. So go to my Patreon channel. Once again, patreon.com/JMCCSCI, the same as the webpage, JMCCSCI. That's my Patreon channel, and I'm going to have an extensive discussion of the physics and science and observables of Comet 3I Atlas at Mars. So, see you there.
This has been Master of Science with host James McCanney. Join us each week as James will delve into historical figures such as Nikola Tesla, Albert Einstein, and the great mathematicians as we explore the history of man, Earth, and our universe as you've never seen it before. Tuesdays, 7 p.m. Eastern.